Hi, and welcome to the show. Rate and review at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today in the show, we have Ronald Halweil. He is an otolaryngologist, and we're going to talk about his book, 50 Years a Doctor, The Journey of Sickness and Health, Four Plagues, and the Pandemic. Ronald, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin.
So we'll get into your book in a little bit, but first off, just briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Right, quite a journey. It started when I was an infant, a newborn, maybe 3 or 4 days old. My mom had invited her father to come see the baby. And when he came to see me, first thing he said was, "He will be a doctor." And my mom heard that and she loved it because she wanted someone in the family to have a really great profession. And I was the only child at that time. So that was how it started. And then, of course, as I got older and I saw other things, we lived near Ebbets Field, the home of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And I would occasionally get enough money together, like 50 cents, and be able to see a ball game. So I wanted to be a baseball player, but that didn't last too long. And then I became very interested in science, and I wanted to be a scientist, biology, chemistry, physics. And as that moved along, and I would tell my mom, "Hey, I think I want to do this," she would say, "No, you're going to be a doctor." And she was a strong woman, and of course I loved her dearly. So time moved on, and I went to grade school, college, and then medical school. And sure enough, I was on my way to be a doctor. I originally wanted to be a general doctor, but this was the time of specialization had started. So it was a toss-up between OBGYN and ear, nose, and throat. The OBGYN, because it'd be more interesting, helping to bring life into the world, and maybe less bad things happening. And as an otolaryngologist, I was interested in the new technique of improving hearing in people who couldn't hear. And it involved microsurgery. And I really enjoyed using the microscope. So when I found out that I might have to stay up all night for days on end as an OBGYN, because the way it was done in those days was once you saw the pregnant woman, you had to stay with her the whole time. There was no group. You were the one. How was I to know that in a few years there would be always a group of doctors and I wouldn't have to worry about that? But I became an otolaryngologist. I loved that field. I loved the microscopy and teaching. At some point, I was teaching other doctors, and I did a lot of surgery, facial surgery, and ear surgery, ear, nose, and throat surgery. And I enjoyed that, and I practiced. I had a private practice at a time when that was possible economically. Now it's not possible much economically.
Would you say impossible to have a private practice otolaryngology practice today?
Pretty difficult. You would maybe if you were the only one in 100 miles away and no one else, then you could do it. But it's controlled, obviously, by the hospitals and the big organizations.
Now, as you reflect on your decades-long otolaryngology career, what would you say are some of the biggest advances that you've seen during your career?
Oh, the big advances were the big ways to look at the parts of the body. We didn't have any way of looking deeper into the body except with a knife or a scalpel. But now we have CAT scans and MRIs. So you don't even have to be a doctor to figure out what's happening. That's the big advance in medicine.
And for those medical students who may be listening to us on this podcast, what are some reasons they should consider otolaryngology as a career?
It also involves plastic surgery of the face and a lot of other surgery, skin surgery, and so on. So if you like to do surgery, that's a field. And obviously you can help lots of people with hearing problems or breathing problems, sense of smell, throat problems. Yeah, tremendous.
All right. Your book is titled 50 Years a Doctor, The Journey of
Yes.
Sickness and Health, Four Plagues, and the Pandemic. Now, tell me the events that led up to you writing this book.
Well, after I retired, I would often think back at the history, what I had been through. It was quite a period of time. And I would see the advances that had been done and the errors, all the errors. And I said, well, I'm going to write this down, and maybe this can help not one person at a time, but maybe hundreds or even thousands of people at a time. Because I had seen the errors as well as the advances.
So tell us one of those stories that you feel would help hundreds at a time. Give us one example.
Well, the example is very simple, and we always see it all the time. We see people who are too large on the street. They've gained too much weight. They have trouble sleeping. They have trouble breathing. And how did this happen? Did someone just plant a pill in them, or was this a slow problem that was getting bigger and bigger with time? And then these people were in danger of serious disease and death. And yet it could definitely be treated early if we recognize it. And that would help a lot in terms of medical costs and lifestyle. We had forgotten about lifestyle. We were more interested in medication and treatment rather than prevention. And these were all preventable problems that I saw.
And speaking from an otolaryngology perspective, tell us how some of these lifestyle issues, how did that affect patients as they came into your operating room?
Well, often they wanted a quick treatment. Can you operate on this? And so on and so forth. And yes, there were times where I could operate on them and help them hear better, have a better sense of smell, and better sense of taste by removing nasal polyps, for example, by talking to them about what they can do without fancy stuff to help themselves.
All right. What are some of the key messages that you want readers to come away with after reading your book?
I want people to know that they are in charge of their health, that health care does not mean that they're in charge of their health. It means that if they get sick, then they can get health care. But why can't they get health? Because no one's talking about it. Health is an old-fashioned thing. Hippocrates spoke about health. They didn't know about these other things, but he spoke about it, that there were ways to stay healthy. Proper eating, diet was the main thing, proper diet, exercise, which is also movement, and rest. Those things could solve a lot of problems. But apparently I'm the only person interested in that.
And why is that? Why aren't we talking about this more?
Because we have a tremendous health care industry, and I fear that's part of the problem.
So what are some ways that we could incorporate more health into our conversation? It could be inside or outside the exam room. What are some ways that we can do that?
Well, we can do it by, for example, having a school class about health. Start early. You could teach people about that when they're teachable. And the other parts are a little harder because we don't talk to our patients as much as we used to. If you could talk to them for a long enough time, something might stick and they might change. But now with the economics of medicine, you can't sit in your office with a patient for a long period of time, just talking to them without doing something.
So you had an excerpt from your book on Kevin MD, Singing Doctors in the Operating Room. Tell us the story behind that excerpt.
Yeah, it's a great story. This comes from the chapter called A Unique Residency. I was lucky enough to get a residency in general surgery, which you needed to be an ear, nose, and throat doctor, in the Honolulu, Hawaii hospital, the Queen's Hospital. And this was very exciting for me and my young wife at the time. I now have another wife. There were very few residents because what my friends told me in medical school, they said, "You're going to Hawaii? Well, what do they know?" But the fact is they knew a lot. There were many surgeons and very few residents. So every procedure, I could be involved in every procedure that I wanted, from the head to the foot, anywhere. I would do the operation with guidance. I would suture with guidance. And I saw the different ways that the doctors operated and the results. I got to see the results. One day, I was working, I had helped a doctor do an appendectomy. I was the assistant. And after he had sutured the wound, he started singing. He was a Hawaiian, native Hawaiian, wonderful voice, and sang so beautifully that anyone within hearing distance of this would quickly come closer to hear more. And I certainly heard it also, and I loved it. It was just, it's the opposite of burnout, of medical burnout. This helps the mind, the body, relaxes. That was what I learned. That was an important thing that I learned. Of course, things changed after that. We were more in control by the establishment. But at that point, I don't think many of the doctors had burnout. They were singing. They were a happy doctor. Great thing.
Such a stark contrast then and now. Now, for a lot of young physicians or physicians in training who may be listening to you now, what are some pieces of advice that you could pass down to them?
Well, you have to really want to be a doctor at this point. You won't be independent. You'll be working for a group or a number of people, and there is a satisfaction of helping. So you still have that satisfaction, and then learning something. They'll be learning about the human body and something they may be able to use for themselves as well.
Any pieces of advice for these physicians who are practicing within a group? Because as you mentioned earlier, there are fewer and fewer doctors practicing independently or in private practice. So within a framework of an employed position or in a group, any pieces of advice that you could share with those physicians?
Yeah, well, they have to make sure that they get enough time out, what I call free time. Even I had a chance to have free time back in the days that I was at the New York Eye and Ear Infirmary, a full lunch hour. And if there wasn't a lot of surgery going on, you were allowed to go out into the world, walk around. You didn't have to be sitting all the time. Sitting, by the way, is not such a good idea if it lasts more than 10 or 15 minutes.
We're talking to Ronald Halweil. He's an otolaryngologist, and he's the author of the book, 50 Years a Doctor, The Journey of Sickness and Health, 4 Plagues and a Pandemic. Ronald, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Well, I think the doctors have to stay strong. They have to be an example to the patients that they are taking care of themselves. They have to have time to exercise, have time to read a book, for example, and have time to have family and friends. Recently, I've become interested in a dream that I have, and that's to paraphrase the Martin Luther King Jr. I have a dream that in the future, and hopefully not the far future, there will be a system of health where everyone will learn what health is. They don't have to be taught what health is. The wisdom of Hippocrates a long time ago had everything that we now know about health. And mostly it had to do with diet. Let food be your medicine, was what Hippocrates said. And most of the problems, if you're not a heavy smoker, most of the problems involve diet at this point.
Ronald, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
My pleasure.